You may be seated. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. And so did mine that morning, just like Wordsworth. I took it as a sign that my first grandson would finally be born that day. I had flown to Colorado a few days before his due date, but that day had come and gone, and in just one more day, I would be heading to the airport to come home. And I did so want to see him and hold him before I had to go. And sure enough, a few hours after seeing the rainbow, there he was, and my heart leapt up. God said that the bow was the sign of the covenant established with the earth and all its creatures. But before that, God uttered one of the saddest phrases in the entire Bible. In the prelude to the flood, earlier in this Noah story, we read, "The Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on earth, and it grieved him to his heart. I will blot out from the earth the human beings I've created, the people together with animals and creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them." I am sorry that I made them. What tragic words from the very same creator who delighted in the earth and the sky, the plant life and the creatures, its human beings made in the image of God. All those things that God looked at, all those things that God looked at and declared good. In just 10 generations, God had gone from pure delight to disappointment at its wickedness. Well, the wickedness of the humans. Creation had gone awry, and it broke God's heart. So he selected one righteous family, Noah and his wife, their 3 sons and their wives, instructed them to build an ark, populate it with a pair of each species, and then God sent the flood and destroyed everything else. Now, we could spend a great deal of time pondering unanswerable questions. Why didn't God create good and obedient people in the first place? Why did God save Noah's family instead of just starting from scratch? We could do that, but today we will focus on the covenant God made with Noah after the flood subsided. The unconditional promise that never again would God cause a flood to wipe out the creation. This year's Lenten readings from the Hebrew Scriptures mostly have to do with covenants between God and God's people. A series of covenants in different times and places and circumstances in the ancient world that give us glimpses of this one God and the relationships between God and people. Far too many of us grew up with the idea that we didn't need to bother with the Hebrew Scriptures. We heard there was an angry Old Testament God of thunder and fire versus our New Testament God of love. We learned that the new covenant of Jesus Christ, crucified, dead, and risen, superseded the old covenant of the law. And those very wrong notions persist, even now that our 1979 Book of Common Prayer calls for including readings from the Hebrew Scriptures in every Holy Eucharist. Because the Hebrew Scriptures are part of our story, our heritage, and familiarity with the stories with the overarching themes can only enrich and deepen our faith. Covenant is one of those overarching themes. In the ancient Near East, covenants were legal documents that generally outlined mutual obligations between two parties who were often unequal in power. The Ten Commandments is that kind of covenant. But this one with Noah is quite different, as is the covenant with Abraham that we will read next week. These are not agreements in which both parties must do something. These are both promises from God, unconditional. Noah does not have to do anything except to be fruitful. I wonder what he and his family thought after weeks with no dry land in sight, floating on the floodwaters in an ark crowded with squawking birds, growling tigers, and trumpeting elephants, trying their best not to step on mice and frogs and earthworms. And then at last the waters recede, the dove flies off and does not return, and God makes the promise. Placing the bow in the sky is a sign, an everlasting covenant in Noah and all creatures, great and small, all creatures, all people. In what is a primordial story that precedes recorded history, there were no Israelites, no Canaanites, no people of different races or ethnic backgrounds or sexual orientation. Noah's offspring became the families that would be the forebears of all people, all other families on earth. And God's promise was to all of these without exception. But the sign, the rainbow, is not for us. It is for God. God set that bow in the sky as a pledge to never wipe out the world again. God laid down that weapon of battle and destruction against creation as a reminder of this promise. A God who needs to be reminded. A God who suffers and grieves, who had regrets, and who changed. Makes you sit up and take notice of your images of God, doesn't it? Are we more comfortable with an immutable, distant God, an unchanging and solid rock, the one constant thing in our own chaotic lives? Or is there room for a God who desires a relationship with us and who knows our struggles and our joys? The thing about the rainbow promise is this. It was not because God believed that all wickedness would be gone in this new creation of Noah and his family and the pairs of animals, but because God knew it had not. Human nature had not changed, but God would now commit to sticking with creation in spite of its imperfection. God would continue to be disappointed and hurt, but would share in the pain of the world and forgive. The flood itself was a return to the chaos of the universe before the creation. And now the bow was the sign that God would be there in the midst of the chaos. In the chaos, the pandemic, the natural disasters, the conflict, the inequities, the need for reconciliation that plague our world today. These were not sent by God. But because of human nature, the lack of love for one another, the neglect of our earth and its creatures. Generation after generation passed, Other covenants were made, but none of them cancel out this everlasting promise to Noah and all creatures. It's a continuous story. And then one day, God intervened into human life again. No natural disasters this time, but a coming to us in human form as Jesus of Nazareth, who taught us, showed us how to love God and one another. Jesus Christ, the fulfillment of the covenant. Yes, the rainbow sign is for God, but we can look at it too, this most beautiful manifestation of God's good creation. Even in these days of spectacular technology, a rainbow stops us in our tracks. We pause, we look, we even call out to those around us and experience the joy and wonder of the bands of color arcing over the sea or the mountains, the plains, and even the sea. Perhaps part of their beauty is that they come after the rain, never without the rain. We ascribe many meanings to rainbows. Luck, as in the pot of gold at the end. That happy place over the rainbow where skies are blue and bluebirds fly. The light at the end of the long, hard storm. The sign of welcome and affirmation to all of God's people. The sign of a place where they can be safe and loved for who they are. All of these meanings are about hope and promise. Well, maybe not the pot of gold. So what if, as we walk our Lenten path toward another sign, the sign of the cross, what if we follow God's example and let the rainbow remind us of God's promise and also help us recall and try to live our own promises, our own commitments, our covenants to God and to each other. Amen.